These two books shaped how I think about economics now. And in this video, I'll explain why each of these two books are worth a read. As someone who wanted to study economics at university, you're gonna have to read books. But not every book is created equally. You know, you have books like Freakonomics and Lunchtime Economist, or whatever it's called, and they're really not that great. They give you quite a surface level introduction to economics. But these two books here are quite accessible, and they're both written by Nobel economics laureates in Joseph Stiglitz and Daniel Kahneman. So that's why I'd recommend both of these books, because they have that pedigree whilst also being accessible. But without further ado, I'll get into why I think each of these books is worth reading. So the first book that I'm going to recommend is this book, Thinking, Fast and Slow. Now this is a behavioral psychology book, but it lends itself so well to economics, because economics is centered around this idea that humans are rational and that they make decisions always in their best interest, using all devices that they have available to them. But this book introduces us to two systems with which our brain uses to think. System 1, which is quick and reactionary and tries to use as little effort as possible, and System 2, which is used for our more difficult tasks. For example, if you were to ask me what color is the sky, I'd instinctively say blue. Not because I've looked at the sky, not because I've got out a color spread and pinpointed what color the sky is. It's just because it's a rule of thumb that I know, a rule of thumb that I trust. And that's what our System 1 thinking is. It's the thinking which is shorthand, off the cuff, and doesn't require us to think. And then we have our System 2 thinking, which requires us really to get into the nitty gritty. For example, if you asked me to do 317 times 23 in my head, I couldn't just spit it out like I could for 2 times 3. Instead, I'd have to think, and I'd have to do a lot of mental arithmetic to get to that answer. And that's me having to use a lot of energy to think. And when you look at our thinking like that, it can allow you to understand why even some of the smartest people fall for simple riddles. Not because they're not smart, because simply their brain is trying to take shortcuts and answer the question with the least amount of energy possible, which then lends to them making mistakes. And when you think about thinking like that, you then get a greater perspective with which you can use to understand why the idea of rationality within economics isn't a great principle. Daniel Kahneman is a Nobel Economics Prize winner, and so a lot of his teachings from this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, can be applied to economics. In this book, there's so many examples to help you understand what System 1 and System 2 are. And so I really liked how it introduced me to behavioral economics, which ended up being one of my favorite modules at university. And behavioral economics is more than just this System 1, System 2 thinking. There's other things that we can apply to economics, such as being present biased or being loss averse, which means that we care more about losing £50 than we do about gaining £50, for example. And when you start thinking like that, you realize that our standard expected utility assumptions within economics aren't actually as worthwhile as we think them to be. And that's why I think it's so important for anyone who is interested in economics to start looking into behavioral economics, because it gives you a much more broader and realistic tool set to use to look at the world, which is what economics is all about. It's about gaining perspective to try and understand how people make decisions. But the current toolbox that we have in economics, which is centered around rationality, is kind of flawed. So integrating some behavioral economics into your toolbox would make your ability to understand decision making that much better. Now, the second book that I'd recommend is The Great Divide by Joseph Stiglitz. And again, this is another Nobel Economics Prize winning economist. And now this book is all centered around inequality, which is really popular now with people like Gareth Stevenson and things like that. And I read this when I was like 16, and it was a little bit complicated, I'll be honest. There's a lot of talk of the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%, which is paraphrasing the quote by Abraham Lincoln, I think, about democracy, which is where it says democracy is for the people, by the people, of the people. And this book is all about helping us understand how our politics and economics has been infiltrated by the 1%. And at the time, I thought that this was a little bit difficult to understand. But as I've got older, and as I look at things like the current Trump administration with the big beautiful bill, which is giving massive tax cuts to billionaires, this book becomes so much more relatable and so much more applicable to real world scenarios, as we see in our politics that the richest 1% are often overrepresented in democracy, and their rights are being fought for so much more. Recently I saw a clip with Zach Polanski and Sadiq Khan talking about potentially banning private jets because the top 1% of emitters produce 50% of emissions. And that's exactly what this book is all about. It's about how taxes and policies are all focused on the regular people, whereas it's actually the 1% who should be doing their fair share but aren't. So to relate back to that thing about emissions, a lot is being asked of regular people, to recycle more, to take the bus instead of take the car. But our emissions are very small compared to the emissions of people who are flying private jets all around the world. So why aren't they being asked to do more? Why is it us who are being asked to do more when really, on the grand scheme of things, our emissions from taking the car instead of taking the bus is so small compared to someone who's jetting around in a private jet? And this book really asks that. It asks, why aren't the 1% being asked to do their fair share? And it explores this by helping us understand how they've infiltrated politics, and actually politicians are representing their best interests rather than the best interests of other people. Now, there are many other books that I could have recommended to you, such as Values by Mark Carney, 23 Things They Don't Teach You About Capitalism, Misbehaving, Prisoners of Geography, Freakonomics, which is probably one of the first books I read, The Ascent of Money, The Shock Doctrine, and Talking to My Daughter About the Economy. All of those are great books, but those any two that I think that have had the greatest impact on me, it has to be these two. Thinking Fast and Slow is such a revolutionary book when it comes to behavioral economics, and it's genuinely the most interesting module that I did at university, and it's all thanks to this book that I read, which gave me the insight into it. If you're doing your personal statement or you just want to read for the fun of it, I would implore you to read this book, because this book is a very great introduction to behavioral economics. It holds your hand the whole time, and as you can see, it's not even that big. It maybe take you a month or two to read. I think that's how long it took me to read, and it won't be time wasted. It's a heavily acclaimed book. You can see the condition of mine. It's absolutely been through it, because I took it everywhere with me. And this book, when I first read it, I didn't really understand it, but when you just look at the news, look at how unfair things are, people who own thousands of houses in the UK while people struggle to even earn the money to afford one house, this book is more relevant than ever. So that's why I'd recommend you read it. And again, it's not written by a no-name, it's written by Joseph Stiglitz, who is a Nobel Economics Prize winner, as is Daniel Kahneman. So these are two very serious books, two books which you won't regret reading. So that's why I put them forward. Again, honorable mentions would be Talking to My Daughter About the Economy and 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. If I had to put forward any two books, it would be these two. If you'd like to know about any other books that I recommend or anything else to do with economics or applying to economics university, let me know.